Hello and welcome to Listen Up. I am Alex Coma. This is Joey Trincali, if you can hold things together. We've got a ton to get to. We're going to start things off with our top 5 topics. We're going to start off with a huge weekend in college football. We had the Iron Bowl with Alabama and Auburn, Virginia Tech extending its winning streak over UVA for the decade of dominance, and a slew of other spectacular games. As the dust settles, which two teams would you say are the most deserving of the top 2 spots in the BCS?
Well, I think that you got to start with Florida State. They're the #1 team in the country now, and they're deserving. Obviously, neither them or Ohio State have played a lot of good teams. Florida State's played Clemson. Ohio State's played a bunch of nobodies from the Big Ten. But for me, it's definitely Florida State. They're in there. And then I think it's pretty hard to judge because, for me, Ohio State is not deserving. They haven't played anyone, and when they have played somebody, they barely won. And I know that shouldn't necessarily be a metric, but we all thought Northwestern was going to be good. They've been awful since they lost to Ohio State. Michigan is not your Michigan of yesteryear. They're a bad football team this year, and they took them right to the brink. So for me, I just can't go with Ohio State, and I know that's probably what we'll end up with if everything just kind of settles as it is. But the fact that Auburn defeated Alabama, I think that they're definitely deserving. And honestly, Alabama probably has some stake to be in that second spot as well. But if it were me, and Auburn wins this weekend in the SEC championship game, I'm going with Florida State. I'm going with Auburn. I think it would be a pretty entertaining game as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. But I do think the thing that's unfortunate is when you look at the way that the BCS standings, sort of panned out, that win over Alabama didn't move the needle too much for the computers.
Which is crazy.
Which is insane, and again, as I've said before, more reason that just really indicates why the BCS needs to die as rapidly as possible. But in the here and now, as you look at this, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. Ohio State, they really haven't had the chance to play anyone because of being in the Big Ten. It's not necessarily their fault, but at the same time, Wisconsin and Northwestern are their biggest wins, and then maybe, I guess, this Michigan game, simply because it was on the road. So I don't know. I think that if they get a chance to play this Michigan State team and, really pummel them, maybe that will show something. But Michigan State, although they are ranked 10th and although they have such a vaunted defense, they've done that against equally bad opposition. It's not like Auburn has played a murderer's row, really. When you look at the top 4 teams here, even Alabama hasn't played anyone particularly challenging outside of Auburn and LSU, really. Auburn is really only...
Tech?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, good old Homer reference in there for you. But Auburn is probably more deserving, but when you look at their big, wins, Ole Miss, Georgia, are really all the things that stand out outside of Alabama, and a loss to LSU, albeit on the road, but still, it's not earth-moving. So I think that, if they get the chance, they'll beat Missouri this weekend, I think, but we'll talk about that more later. But, they'll have that under their belt. I don't know that will vault them up to the #2 spot, even though they're probably just a hair more deserving than the Buckeyes.
Yeah, I think it's pretty unfair that they don't move ahead of Ohio State, even though Ohio State has yet to lose. I don't know. I think the whole thing is that we need a playoff. and it needs to happen this year.
How perfect would it be? You've had the top
great.
4 teams, all because Missouri's #5. Missouri will probably lose. That will sort of drop them out of things.
And if they win, then good for them. They're in there.
Exactly. And so it would be a really nice top 4 because then you'd have the chance to possibly see Auburn and Alabama play again. You'd have a chance to, say, Florida State go up against these SEC teams. You'd have a chance for OSU to play there for real, if only it was 2014 already.
And I think, too, what's interesting, we always talk about these teams who they haven't played anyone. Well, a team like Florida State has beaten some good opponents, but then they end up being not good opponents because they beat them. It's similar when you come down to the NCAA tournament for basketball every year, and I know that the folks here in Blacksburg have made the argument before. Virginia Tech beats a team that's 40th in the RPI at the end of the year, and then now they're 60th in the RPI because Virginia Tech beat them. And it's like, what do you have to do to get in? So that's why you want the 14 playoff. It would be really good for this year, but the only team I think that for sure is getting in is Florida State right now. And otherwise, I think it is a toss-up.
Watch out for the Blue Devils. You just don't know. David Cutcliffe's boys might pull off the upset of the century.
Hey, he's doing a lot of good stuff. There's no doubt about that. All right, we're going to stick with college football and talk about those Hokies. Should the fans be satisfied for beating UVA for the 10th straight year, but not making the ACC championship game this season?
Well, perhaps satisfied is the wrong word, but I've said it a lot leading up to this, and I pretty firmly believe that had the Hokies made the ACC championship game, despite still losing 4 games and some very bad losses in there to boot. I really think that would have been more of a net negative for this program than a net positive. You know, obviously, there's always the chance that they could go on to beat the Seminoles. They do have a good defense that could give a young quarterback trouble, but that is all just so atmospherically unlikely that I just think that more than anything, it would have rewarded the coaching staff for a lot of the thinking that they've always had, which is setting their sights on an AC title. No matter how many losses we have or how bad they are, if we win our division and get to the ACC championship game, we can stamp this season as a success. And you heard Frank Beamer a little bit after the UVA game already sort of hedging in that direction, saying, well, for all these injuries, for all these things that we had to endure to still come out with 8 wins is really encouraging for me. And I just think that that's really indicative of the things that are wrong with the program, and a trip to the ACC championship game when I think a team like Duke is more deserving to go simply because of the quality of the wins that they've had and the things that David Cutcliffe have done with inferior talent. I think that would have been not a step back necessarily, but an unfair reward.
Well, you're in the school of thought of a lot of the fans last year who wanted the 10-win streak to end because it kind of served as this beacon of inferiority to the rest of college football's great teams, and I understand that for sure. My thing, I think it's always great to get the ACC championship game. I don't think there's ever a bad time for that to happen to a program. But no, I think that Duke was definitely more deserving. But it's also interesting to look at this Hokie team and say, what if they didn't play Alabama the first game of the season? What if they played a nobody? What if they played, a mid-major kind of team and
another
won?
directional Carolina?
Yeah, exactly. What if they did? And they're 9-3. Does that change your feeling about the season at all?
No, not really. I mean, honestly, I loved that Alabama game. Not only was that more national press than they've gotten in some time, but it also, they went out there and put up a fight about it. And people still refer to the fact that Alabama, for as good as they were, had one of their worst games ever against that Tech defense, even though Logan Thomas just completed 5 passes and just looked like a train wreck. That still left an impression in people's minds. I think that was a positive. And what I really like is that there were a lot of reports that said that ESPN offered Tech the chance to not play Alabama in, I think, August, pretty close leading up to it. And Frank Beamer said, no thanks, we're in the game, we'd like to stay in the game. And I like that. But you're right, it's a totally different picture if they don't.
Yeah, and my other thing about this team is the fact that you have to look at, this year is not a failure with the coaching staff because it's a new coaching staff for the most part. It's a new scheme, specifically on offense, obviously. And I think you have to let those guys recruit and those guys get their own people in and get their scheme in during the spring, which I know they had the opportunity to last year, but all the way leading up, spring practices, summer practices, what have you. And I think that's when we can start to judge this team. It ends up being a little bit of an unfair advantage for the senior class because a lot of negative things end up being put upon them. But a lot of times it's hard. When you change staffs and schemes like that, it's really difficult. So I also think you have to think about it that way, that this team did a lot of good with sort of a tough draw.
Yeah, and I agree with that, but at the same time, this was a very senior-heavy team, particularly on defense, not so much on offense. But on defense, you had a core coming back that I think played exceptionally for long periods of time, and were often, they certainly had their slip-ups, their miscues, allowing 122 yards on the ground to C.J. Brown being chief among them. But the offense certainly did them no favors, and whether that's a function of their inexperience of the new coaching staff, when you look at the quality of opponents that they played, it's a little inexcusable. And quite frankly, to throw those 4 interceptions against Duke, you can say all you want about how well the Blue Devils have played this year, but when you look at that game, that is a game the Hokies should have won, plain and simple, and that changes the narrative 180 degrees. Now, no longer are the Blue Devils, they'd be maybe a footnote, they'd be a nice story, but they'd change from being maybe in a couple of years Cutcliffe can get these guys going, into Virginia Tech winning the Coastal again. And that is solely on the offense, and when you look at the quality of teams that they've played, I don't think that you can just say, it's a rebuilding year. And it's a rebuilding year, but look at the competition. Next year is going to be sort of a similar situation. You're going to have Ohio State, but other than that, it's not a very difficult ACC slate. So I feel like we're going to be talking about the same thing next year if we get a job afterward, of course.
But I do think it's important that they beat UVA for the 10th straight year.
Oh,
I think it's extremely important because if you lose this game, that senior class is going down as one of the most embarrassing finishes to a season of all time.
It's bad enough to lose your senior day at home, but they do have the distinction of going 4-0 against UVA over their time here. 5-0 if you want to count a guy like Logan who said, I was on the travel squad, I was there for the whole time. I'm willing to give that much to him. If that's his legacy, that he broke all these records somehow and never lost to UVA, well, you could certainly do worse.
What are people going to think? I'm sorry, I know we got to move on, but what are people going to think, like 30 years down the line,
That's gonna
if
be
you're a
head-scratcher.
Hokie fan, when you're coming in and you look at that? I don't know, it's going to be odd.
Yeah, that's going to be a hard one to explain to the kids. All right, moving on to pro football. New Orleans and Seattle. They played last night in a showdown of, at the time, the showdown of the NFC's two best records. In your opinion, who is the best team in the NFC?
If they're at home, I think it's certainly Seattle, and it's not really very close. Russell Wilson is incredible right now, and the defense, even without Browner, is showing how great they are. And here's the thing. They essentially have to split to finish the year 2-2, and they get home field advantage throughout the playoffs. And at that point, how do you beat them? How do you beat them at home at this point? So even if I wanted to go in the direction of New Orleans, if they had home field advantage, or even a really good up-and-coming Carolina team possibly, I have a hard time saying that, mostly because I know the context around it, that this Seattle team at home is pretty much unbeatable.
Yeah, and you nailed it when you're talking specifically about the home field advantage. Because New Orleans, we've seen this before. A lot of people were hyping up this game, and I was really optimistic. I love watching Drew Brees. I am inclined to root for them. But at the same time, I was nervous going into this game, and a lot of my fears were confirmed. Drew Brees is a guy that plays in the dome a lot. He goes outside to the especially unfriendly confines of good old CenturyLink Field, and all of a sudden you're looking at a different team. And so I think that, the Seattle Seahawks rightly deserve to be considered the top team in the NFC right now. I think that probably people are going a little too far in the other direction, thinking that the Saints can't do this, but you're 1,000,000% right. If the Seahawks manage to get home field advantage, it's going to be just a momentous task that I don't think a team like the Saints could overcome. Maybe a team like the Panthers are better suited to win that game than the Saints necessarily are. And you've heard me say often that I still think that the Saints are the better team, although we will find out for sure this weekend.
We will find out for sure this weekend. The other thing, when I look at this question, and even putting it to the AFC as well, is this idea that there are no teams at the top of either conference that aren't without flaws.
Yeah.
All these teams have flaws. So when I look at them, I really just want to look and see which one's strengths do I think play the best once we get to the playoffs, and which one's strengths are at their best. Now, that's why you like Denver, because they've got Peyton Manning and the offense is great. And that's why you like Tom Brady and the Patriots. That's why you like Seattle, because they have the defense, and Russell Wilson's playing out of his mind. And you look at Carolina, and there's a lot of deficiencies in the secondary and the offensive line, but I love their defense so much, and I think Cam Newton's to a new place, that you have to give them a lot of credit too, and I really do think they could be bandied into the discussion as well. But that's what over the last 4 games of the season, that's what I want to look at. Whose strengths do I like the most? Because that's what I think is going to do the best. Because in today's NFL, with the salary cap, no team is without their flaws. No team is, the teams of yesteryear where they were perfect squads on both offense and defense. You just don't see that at this point anymore.
Yeah, and I think that when you look at Seattle specifically, the reason that so many people like them and the reason that I think that they're so frequently successful is that they know what they do very well. They can defend the pass really well. They've got an excellent running game, and certain games like last night, when it wasn't necessarily going, Russell Wilson can step up when he has to. The concern that you might want to look at are their playmakers, how healthy they are, how well they're playing, but you know what? It's been enough to get by, and when you've got the threat of one of the few true workhorse backs left in the league, in Marshawn Lynch, at least for now, then it really opens things up for a guy like Russell Wilson that can be mobile in the pocket, if not necessarily making plays with his legs down the field. I think that you look at that type of offense, and that's one that's built for the playoffs. I think that it showed last season in the fact that they got as far as they did, and I think that it's going to show again this year, simply because when you examine a team like the Saints, they have some semblance of a running game, but not enough to lean on it when they need it. And I think that's been proven in a lot of years, and it's sort of come out to bear again this year. This year with the Panthers, we're sort of seeing similar things to what we've seen before. Steve Smith is always going to be a threat down the field, but then Brandon LaFell, he's perfectly fine, but in the playoffs when you have a little more time to think about it and scheme for one team specifically, it's a lot easier to shut down when you don't have that many threats. So I think that really it comes down to the fact that they have such a balanced offense, and they're so good at stopping the pass, and so few people, it seems, are these days.
All right, let's stick with this topic. I kind of started to talk about it just a little bit. Let's talk about the AFC now, because we had another matchup this week, and the Broncos defeating the Chiefs. That was supposed to be two of the best teams in the AFC. So for you right now, let's do a mirror question. Who's the best team in the AFC?
It's rough, let me tell you. I mean, I know that the Patriots are 9-3 and that the Broncos are 10-2, but I don't have a ton of faith in either of these teams.
The flaws
really.
for those teams, I think, are
particularly
a lot higher than their pros right
Absolutely, absolutely. Because when you look at what these teams have done throughout the course of the year, obviously Denver has played incredibly well, but look at what you might call their best wins. They would have to be that pair of Kansas City wins, including especially the one in Arrowhead this past week. But at the same time, Kansas City hasn't played that well. Now, granted, having a 3-game losing streak and having 2 of those be to Denver is something that you can't necessarily fault the Chiefs for too much. But at the same time, outside of those wins, Baltimore to start the year, I mean, that team has looked better, and they did blow them out, so I suppose that could be a good win. This 52-20 win over Philadelphia is looking better, but at the same time, no Nick Foles at the time. The team really isn't the same Eagles squad that we're looking at now as a playoff contender. So I think it's really hard to point to one win and be like, this was Denver's statement. It would really have to be one of those Kansas City games, and even then, in both contests, I never felt particularly convinced of their dominance, but when you look at the Patriots, it's exactly the same thing. They edged out the Saints. They kept it very close with the Panthers, but sort of didn't do what they needed to at the end of the game. And then you've got that Denver win, which was just a strange game that I just don't think that you can ascribe too much to one way or the other. How often is it that a team comes back from 24 down at halftime but goes to overtime and then only loses because of a miscue in the punting game? It's really hard to pick one of these teams being better at the other.
Yeah, I think you hit on a lot of great points. I have a hard time deciding as well. I like to go with the Patriots because we've seen them do it time in and time out, but you know what? They haven't in the playoffs as of recently.
Yeah.
It's been a while, so it's tough for me to go with them either. I think the Denver's problems, to me, have really shown themselves over the past few weeks, because I think defensively they're just not where they need to be. A lot of guys have been hurt in and out. The secondary is very iffy right now. And then when you look at Kansas City, I think that maybe their defense might be the best of the bunch, but still when it's been push come to shove, they really haven't gotten it done over the past few games against San Diego or Denver both times. And then, your last team... No, I've said all the ones that I want to talk about in the AFC, because the AFC is not...
That's where the conversation is.
The South is a mess. I don't believe in Indianapolis right now, and the Bengals are leading the North, and somehow... I watched this team a lot so far this year. But the thing is, I don't know how they win any week. I really don't. They have a great defense, but somehow they continue to get victories, and I don't know how they do it. So I really don't. I have no clue. I guess I would go with the Broncos push come to shove, but I don't feel great about that.
Yeah, I just basically purely on gut feeling, I would say the Broncos, when you look at their schedules down the stretch in terms of who's going to end up with this number 1 seed, they both have relatively easy schedules. I'll tell you the last 4 for each one. The Patriots get Cleveland, Miami, Baltimore, Buffalo. Denver, on the other hand, gets Tennessee, San Diego, a pair of teams that you could call in the hunt if you wanted to.
They're there.
Which
They're
speaks to the quality of the AFC. And then Houston and Oakland, not so much. So probably the Pats had it marginally easier simply because they're playing teams with less to play for other than draft picks when you really consider it. And they do have the head-to-head tiebreaker, so you could certainly see a scenario where they come out on top and maybe Denver fades a little bit and ends up with the number 2 seed. But unlike with the Saints and the Seahawks, home field advantage isn't nearly as important for these two teams. Maybe you could make the case that going up to Mile High in Denver has some bearing on things.
But Peyton hates it.
Exactly, yeah. And his record in cold weather is well dissected and documented, if it truly means anything at all, which I have my doubts about. But honestly, I just think that these two teams are neck and neck. We'll probably see a replay of this game in the playoffs at one point or another. depending on how things shake out. And honestly, if there were to be any year to see some random team come roaring up from the wild card or from a lower seed, I think this would be the one because I have no confidence. In the AFC, yes. I would have no confidence in either of these two teams. Because couldn't you see a team like Baltimore randomly getting hot, making it into the playoffs, and winning 1 or 2 games it shouldn't? I think I could.
Even though the Chargers lost this last weekend, I could see them doing that as well.
Just as easily. All right, moving up back to college football, former Washington Husky head coach Steve Sarkisian has been hired as the next head coach at USC. How do you feel about the hire?
I don't have a lot of feelings about this. USC, I've heard, is on the West Coast, and that's something that we don't like to talk about here and listen up. But no, I think that it's interesting just from the fact that USC is supposed to be one of the great coaching spots in the entire of the NCAA. And as much as I know they like Sarkisian at USC because of what he did there as an offensive coordinator, I just feel like they could have done better.
I heard so many big names sort of bandied about as consideration for this job. And it's not to say that Steve Sarkisian isn't a big name. I think he's, for the most part, very well regarded, even though his Huskies teams haven't necessarily, lit the world on fire. I still feel like he was considered a guy that was in line for a bigger job down the road. But I think it's telling that they had to go to a guy that had some history with the school, and that they couldn't go out there and grab someone who was, maybe more star-making. I don't know who it would be. I heard a lot of people talk. It seems like David Shaw's name is mentioned anytime there is any sort of coaching vacancy
go there
anywhere. Exactly. And honestly, I feel like that was the question that a lot of coaching candidates sort of asked themselves. Why would I want to go there right now? Right now, you're looking at the opportunity to just be sort of another team in the Pac-12, which is what they've been these last couple of years, despite us hearing about, the sanctions are gone, Lane Kiffin's going to turn it around. And I'm honestly a little confused why if Sarkisian was their best option, they didn't just pick Orgeron. It seemed like he was a fiery guy. It seemed like the players liked playing for him. I don't know.
I'm all about Coach O.
Coach O, yeah. I would have been in for that.
I think he's hilarious. I think that you need those kind of guys in college football. I would have definitely been all about that.
Yeah, and it just seems to me Sarkisian is very much an admission that they couldn't land someone that was higher. It really feels like they got desperate maybe before they needed to. It's not as if the coaching carousel is even remotely close to being done spinning. So I really think that they had other options here, and they just sort of threw up their hands and they went, well, we'll go with the hometown guy. We've seen him before. Maybe he'll do it again.
My one thing, though, is that the sanctions are over. That is all getting worked out, and USC is still a college that you see at the top of the recruiting boards now. Now they got all those scholarships back, so do not be surprised if he's able to walk in. And we talked about this a few months ago when Lane Kiffin got fired, how we still thought the next guy that came in, whoever it was going to be walking into a pretty nice situation. I think that we can both agree that even though it's not as nice as the Matt Leinart and P.A. Carroll years, that you're still looking at a pretty good job.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting to me is because to me it seems like there are tools there, but I guess not so much to the rest of the college football world.
All right, we're going to move on to Pick'em. Guess what? I won again. I'm so good right now. I have 6 wins this semester. Alex has 3, and there's just not enough time for Alex to come back. So cue the horns and the parade. I have won it all forever. So you're welcome. All right, let's talk about Pick'em for this week, though. We're still going to pick because Alex... Whatever.
Lovely game.
All right, in the NFL, we got a couple of those games. Indianapolis at Cincinnati. We talked about both teams a little bit so far tonight.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about a pair of teams. I don't particularly believe in either one, but I have watched a lot of Cincinnati recently as a fellow AFC North foe, and they impress me just in no way. I know that the Colts, I know they had to kick 5 field goals to beat the Titans last week, but I still feel as if they have enough on offense to overcome what is gradually becoming a beat-up, battered Bengals defense.
Remember when we were talking about little to no options on offense? That is the Colts. They have none.
T.Y. Hilton.
None. I'm going with Cincinnati. The defense, albeit battered, is very good, and I think that somehow they do it again.
You never know. More NFL. Detroit at Philadelphia.
I don't want to be on the Philadelphia train because it scares me. Sorry. But I'm going to go with Philadelphia. I think Detroit is such a wild card. It seems like every other week they show up. And Chip Kelly has shown that he loves Nick Foles. What is it? His quarterback for the next 1,000 years. I'll go with the Eagles.
I have to agree. I also would like to take the Eagles. You know, Detroit is an intriguing team. They had that big win over the Packers, but it also was sort of indicative of everything that Detroit does. Score all these points and still all these turnovers. I can't, in good conscience, take the Lions. Give me the Eagles.
All right, Carolina at New Orleans.
Well, this is a grudge match of the two teams that we've been talking about all year. Just for consistency, I've already lost. I will take the Saints.
I'm going to go with the Panthers. They pretty much won me, I would say, this beautiful pick-em this semester. So, yeah, I'm going with the Carolina Panthers to the Super Bowl.
For a small measure of redemption. Come on, Drew Brees. All right, in college football, the SEC championship game, Missouri and Auburn.
I just don't think that Missouri has enough. I really don't. I love the fact that we've got two Tigers teams playing for the SEC championship. If that doesn't get you excited, I don't know what will.
What will? Yeah, I completely agree. I'd love to take Missouri here. They do a lot of things well, but at the end of the day, Auburn is just an elite offensive team, and as good as, I can't even say the Tigers, so stupid, as good as the, we'll say, South or Midwestern Tigers happen to be, the ones from Alabama happen to be better, so Auburn.
All right, Big Ten championship game, number 2 Ohio State versus number 10 Michigan State.
Yeah, we talked about it. I'd love to take Sparty. The defense seems to be good, but who have they done it against? Absolutely no one. Ohio State has a heck of a lot of offense, especially with Carlos Hyde. Buckeyes.
I'm going with Sparty. I want them to win, and I think that Ohio State is really bad. So that's why I'm going with Michigan State.
Even with Pick'em over, still swinging for the fences.
What can I say?
All right, we're going to knock you out with our second to last quick hits. A big shout out to the Virginia Tech women's soccer team for making it to the Final Four of the NCAA tournament. Do you think they can become the first team in Tech history to win a national title?
I've watched a lot of women's soccer this year, including the team that they're playing. And yes, I really do think it. They're playing Florida State in the semifinals. It's really hard to beat a team 3 times. Florida State's already defeated Virginia Tech twice. I said they make it to the finals, and then I think it's a coin flip.
I'm very nervous about that Florida State game. The 2-1 and a 1-0 loss against them. I sure hope so. Let me put it this way. I will be there on Sunday.
Wow, I like it. I like it. All right, a video has surfaced showing Steelers coach Mike Tomlin moving towards the sideline during Ravens Jacoby Jones' kickoff return on Thanksgiving night. How do you feel about Tomlin's little jig on the sideline?
It's sort of the way that you feel about a player that you might call dirty in hockey, like Matt Cook. If he's playing against you, hate him and you think he's the worst, but because he's on my team, I love him and I think it's hilarious. Just, oh, was I on the field? Oh, man, I didn't even know.
Personally, I thought the dance move was great, and the smile afterwards capped it off.
The fact that it spawned a million Mike Tomlin jumping out of the way gifs is also an added bonus.
I'm totally cool with it.
All right, speaking of coaches trying to cheat their way to victory, how do you feel about Jason Kidd purposely spilling his Coke on the floor so he could draw one up one more play before the end of the game?
You know what? You got to do what you got to do, and right now Brooklyn has less wins than the Wizards, which is never good. So I think that you got to do it.
This is another guy that I love, Jason Kidd, where again, if anyone else did. But you know what, Jason? Just your team is terrible. Still
so
as much
bad.
Coke on the floor as you'd like.
It's not a good start so far for the Nets and Jason Kidd. All right, the Redskins suck, okay? We all know it. But at the end of the game against the Giants this past week, the referees in the chain game royally screwed the Skins by giving and then taking away a first down. How major of a screw-up was this by the referees?
I thought it was absolutely hilarious. If it had been between two teams that were actually playing for something, I think you would have seen this magnified 10 times. Like, remember the Fail Mary or whatever you want to call that? It was worse than that, I think. And yet, it's between two teams that are just not within a stone's throw of the playoffs, so you know what?
What
Fine,
about
do
all
what you
the
want.
degenerate gamblers out there that lost good money on that game, Alex?
Al Michaels was upset by not them covering.
There are plenty of nice gamblers out there that feel bad about that.
I'm sure they do. More NFL for our final quick hit. Vernon Davis, he was tackled, let's say, in the man parts on Sunday and tweeted out, it should be a league rule saying the defender cannot tackle a player by his penis, calling it the most painful thing ever. Is this play fair or foul?
I think that, again, you gotta do what you gotta do. The penis is in play.
The penis is in play. That's the stance that we're going to end the show on? Really? To be fair, Vernon Davis previously discussed how athletic cups really slow him down too much. So while I feel sympathy for him, at the same time, you sort of brought this on yourself. That is what they exist
Agreed.
for.
It's like
literally.
the hair thing in the back.
Precisely.
What are you going to do? All right, thanks for watching Listen Up this week. Don't forget to tune into our last episode next week.